Hey guys, it's Shuru, and today I'll be doing my first voiceover tutorial on how to make comics. Okay, the first step you want to take is kind of storyboarding your whole comic out. This is a tip I got from Lavender Town, actually. She's great. Check out her videos. And basically what you want to do is you want to lay out all of your characters, your backgrounds, your speech bubbles, and your panels, and just make sure that everything flows smoothly before you actually get to lining it. And you don't want to make the sketches too detailed or put too much effort in them, because you have to be able to erase them easily in case you change your mind or have to fix something or decide you don't want the story to go this way and you want it to go that way, or you didn't want that panel over there, or you wanted to split the sequence into two panels or whatnot. This is literally just the visual planning stage. Next up is the lining of the panels. I suggest that you do this first so that any detailed sketching or lining you do doesn't get cut off later on and you know where to constrain the background. What I did here is that I took a template from Kabam Publishers, which is a comic publishing company, so that I know that nothing gets cut off in book form. This step is completely optional if you're a digital publisher, but if you do want to get your comic printed someday, I highly suggest that you look them up and go get the template from them. Next is the more detailed sketching phase. If you notice here in my original sketch, you couldn't see the characters' faces at all, not their hairstyles or the detailed workings of their poses. So I sort of just fixed that up over here so I would be able to actually see what I was doing when I did the lines. You'll notice that I don't do this all the time throughout the speed paint, and that's because sometimes I have a really clear vision of what I want to do and what the character's already doing. But I highly suggest that you do sketch things out beforehand just so that you don't look wonky later on. The only reason why I don't follow my own rules is because I am lazy. I'm sorry, I'm a terrible role model. And next up is one of the most crucial steps in the comic making process, the lines. You see, when the lines look bad, no matter how good your shading is, nothing else looks good, so you've got to nail the lines. Also, here is where you can change your mind about many different things. For example, that box of furniture wasn't there before, but I decided to put it in because I thought it gave the room a little more atmosphere. And also you'll notice that I changed this character, Seth's expression. Before, he's staring very intensely down at his hands, trying to search for something in the box, but Seth is a really aloof, cynical character who doesn't try hard at anything because he's kind of a jerk, and he's here helping his neighbor unpack, which is not something he would be wanting to focus intently on. So I changed his expression to him blowing his bangs out of his face instead, to emphasize that, A, to kind of call to attention how long his bangs really are, and B, that he's more focused on his hair than his actual work. It makes him seem more detached with his task and more disingenuous, which is not a quality you would want in a character, but this is a trait that I wanted to call attention to in Seth because he's your typical teenage boy and doesn't care about anything, which will change later, I promise. You'll see in some areas sometimes I black things out, and that's just to make things easier in the coloring process. I don't shade with this drawing style, so what I do sometimes to enforce dimension is that I black things out, or I make lines thicker or thinner in some areas just to give some shape and form to these objects. This is a really easy and nifty thing to do if you don't want to shade in your drawing style, or if you feel like your style is too simple to shade in, so you can just fancy up the line art. Because if the line art looks good, then everything else will fall into place. Sometimes a check that I like to make is I turn the sketch layer on and off just to see if the line art looks good without the sketch layer. Because we all know that sometimes the sketch looks really good, but we then do our line art, turn the sketch layer off, and realize it looks terrible. So before you're completely done the line art, every once in a while just make quick checks every now and then and redo certain areas before you get the whole thing done and you can't redo anything anymore. I find that this makes the whole process just go by a lot easier. Another thing I want to call attention to right here is line weight. You'll notice that the lines in the background are really thin and the lines of the characters are pretty thick, and that's just to draw more attention to the characters and less attention to the background. You never want your background to overshadow your characters when you're trying to focus on your characters, so you should always try to label whatever's important and whatever's not important by using line weight. Next up is coloring. You'll notice that I will pull up previous comic book pages that I did and also an image from a color palette website called Coolers. This is to make sure that the colors are consistent. Now you'll see that because I tried really hard in the line art, it'll be pretty easy to color the page because all I have to do is click around with the paint bucket tool. And I know that some of you guys have your woes with the paint bucket tool because it always leaves like weird outlines that you have to fill in with the pencil tool later, but you can avoid this by using Metabang Paint Pro and by selecting the expand pixels by how many option. And what this does is that this makes the shape that the paint bucket covers this much bigger, so that it encompasses the line art and you don't have to go back in again. But this method isn't completely foolproof. As you can see, sometimes there's little white speckles here and there. And instead of filling them in, what I do is I zoom in really, really close, and then I click around and just fill in the pieces one by one by one. And for some reason, this is more time saving to me than going back and selecting a different tool and then going back to color again. I don't know, this works for me. I'm not sure if it'll work for you guys, but it feels like it saves a lot of time for me. A couple more tips on coloring is that I suggest you choose a really solid color palette. For example, my comics colors kind of change with the mood, and the colors are always in like the same sort of family. They always go together no matter what. So for example, we're in this blue sort of gloomy vibe inside Alan's house, and you'll notice that Seth's hair is actually a dark brown, but it looks kind of bluish here, and so does Alan's. And Pete over there is blonde, but his hair looks kind of beigey, tealish almost. And that's because I wanted all the colors to mesh together, to kind of blend into each other and make the scene look overall aesthetically pleasing. Not all comic artists do this. A lot of artists just have the colors exactly as they are and they never change. And that's totally fine, but for me, I did mine this way because I wanted the reader to be able to pick up on mood shifts and the atmosphere without having to explicitly state that the air felt kind of this way or that way, and just express it through colors instead, if that makes sense. And the final step is adding in any special effects, such as the little laughter lines, the little sweat drops, the little huff of Seth blowing his hair out of the way, and the words. So basically what I do for the special effects is I just doodle them in, and for the words I use a different program, paint.net. It's totally free, and it's actually not a bad program despite some of the backlash it receives. I use a font made out of my own handwriting. You can look it up. They'll take you to a place where you can fill out a sheet and make your own font based off of what you write. And I make a new layer, make sure to make a new layer. This step is crucial. And I put my text where I decided it would be in the storyboarding. I delete the original comic layer underneath, so you just have the transparency with the text, and then I save that as a separate PNG image. I open that in Metabang Paint Pro. I select everything, copy paste onto the original manuscript, and then I just draw the speech bubbles, and we're totally done. So that is how I make my comics. I know my methods don't really apply to everyone, but I really, really hope that my tips would help somebody out there, hopefully. And thanks for watching. Subscribe for more content, I guess. I'll definitely be trying to put some more things out there soon. Thanks again for watching, and see you soon.